do. Today it's basics of kosher actually in today's chumash. You are sons of God, which means God considers us a priestly nation, a holy nation. He expects us to act and behave morally and beautifully as is necessary of the Jewish people. And therefore, don't gash yourself in your skin when a person dies. So in those days at a pain, people will make gashes, but you are the sons of God. You're supposed to be a beautiful, healthy, dignified people. How would it look with you walking around with gashes on yourself? You're supposed to be beautiful. And you should not place a gash of baldness between your eyes. And we learn that from the verses. It actually means the whole head. A baldness also for the death of people. The maze, to commemorate and to show sadness, they would shave their head. That also should not be done when it's done for a dead person, that this is not the Jewish way of behaving and acting. Hashem wants us to look dignified and beautiful. I want to just bring that, just one of the commentaries on this. Places going to do doesn't just mean that we shouldn't gash ourselves. The interpretation of the word is you shouldn't make separation. We actually learn from here that it's a problem when there's two Bethdins who rule opposing each other on certain cases. Could also violate this permission of making separation among the Jewish people, because that obviously gets very complicated as two Bezdins start to rule against each other in different cases. But we won't get into that now. Why should you not do this stuff, gashes and stuff for dead people? Because you're a holy nation, Hashem to God. Your God, and God chose you to be His holy, endearing nation. You're the sons of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, as Rashi says. You're born from holiness, and Hashem continues to perpetuate that holiness among you from all the nations that's on the face of the earth. And therefore you have to act in a way that this is where it comes from the idea that a Jew has to act in a dignified, holy, precious manner, because he's the part of this beautiful nation. And part of that is being a holy Jewish person is you have to eat certain things and act in a certain way. You shouldn't eat anything that's an abomination. Like, for example, what's a case of that? We learned in the Chumash 2 days ago's Chumash, that an animal, a sacrifice, that if it got a blemish, you're allowed to eat. Guys, I'm giving a class over here, so just be quiet for a few more minutes. That if an animal had a blemish, you're allowed to eat the animal that was once a sacrifice. Since you can't bring a blemished animal as a sacrifice to Hashem, it becomes you're allowed to redeem it, and you're allowed to eat that animal that once was a sacrifice, but now it has a blemish. So what might somebody want to do? Somebody might want to deliberately and specifically make a gash in their sacrifice so that they should be allowed to eat it. But that's going to be abomination. That's what the verse is saying. You're holy people. Don't make gashes in animals and then eat it because you made a gash. It's an abomination to Hashem. Also mixing milk and meat together. You're a holy nation. You have to act in a special way. You're not allowed to eat stuff that are a mixture of milk and meat, because you're not like the rest of the world. You have to have a certain level of holiness. Verse 4. What animals should you eat? Moshe is going to review for the Jewish people what's kosher and non-kosher as a holy nation, what we could and can't eat. Shar could be an ox, a sheep, either a sheep lamb or a goat. Ayil utzvi, we're allowed to also eat a gazelle and a deer, v'yachmor, and an antelope, v'akol, v'dishon, usoy v'zemer, an ibex, camias, a bison, and a giraffe. All those animals are kosher animals that we can eat. Now, the reason the Torah chooses to list the kosher animals and not list the non-kosher animals, which is a simple logical reason Rashi explains, that is because they are less kosher than non-kosher animals. So instead of making a big list and reading us this whole list of all the non-kosher animals, take the shorter list, tell us the shorter list. The shorter list is the kosher animals, and therefore tell us the list of the kosher animals. Besides listing us the names of the kosher animals, we also know that there's a simple sign of how to tell how they're kosher, and he's going to tell you that. Any animal that is split hooves, completely split, is completely split into two sections, which means I guess there should be some animals that are partially split. They don't have the toenails coming out fully split, or on top they're not fully split. If it does have a full, complete split, malas gera, and it chews its cud, regurgitates its food. That animal is the animal that's the correct animal that you're allowed to eat it. And Rashi says something interesting, a fascinating case. Now you need to follow the rules of shchita, which we mentioned in 2 days ago's class, in order to still make the animal kosher. What happens if you slaughtered the kosher ritual slaughter on the mother animal and the baby was inside it? So does the slaughter of the ritual slaughter on the mother already fulfill the obligation of ritual slaughter on the baby? And the answer is yes, that the ritual slaughter of the mother goes on the baby too. You don't need to kill it in the same way of ritual slaughter because it's already fulfilled that obligation by being inside the mother. An interesting rule we learn out from that verse. Verse 7. However, these that could have either chew its cuds or have a completely split hoof, you should not eat them. And he tells you a list of 4 or 5 animals. Gamo, Vesar Neves, Vesar Shafon, Hashasua, Esagamo, Sar Neves, Vesar Shafon, those are 4, which means the camel, the hyrax, the hare, or maybe it's 3 here actually. You're not allowed to eat them, even though they have partial signs. Because they do chew their cud. However, they don't have completely split hooves. Rashi says there's a 4th kind of animal actually called a shasua. That's an interesting animal that has 2 backs, 2 spines, or so on, and so on. Now, Rashi tells us we did have an earlier chumash a while ago. We learned in Leviticus about the list of kosher and non-kosher animals. Why does Moshe have to repeat it for us over here? And the answer is because there's a new animal, a 5th animal, the shasua, that he's telling us about here that he didn't tell us about earlier. This 2 with 2 backs, with 2 spines, that he's telling you it's also not kosher, even though it regurgitates its food, it still doesn't have completely split hooves, and therefore it's not kosher. And then we have verse 8. That's a chazer, of course, the famous pig. Kimafris parsahu, because it does have completely split hooves. Lageira, but it doesn't chew its cud. Tamiu lachem, it's impure to you. You should not eat their meat, and don't even touch their carcasses. Now, because they'll make you impure. Rashi just says there's no prohibition specifically about becoming impure generally. The Torah is referring to the times when a Jew is supposed to go up to the Beis Hamikdash on the holidays. He has to keep an extra level of holiness. There's nothing wrong with you becoming impure generally by touching impure carcasses, but we're specifically talking about when a Jew has to go up to the temple, make sure not to become impure from the carcasses of these animals during that time. And what about the stuff in the water? This you should eat. Whatever has fins and scales is kosher fish. And whatever doesn't have fins and scales, you shouldn't eat. It's impure to you. What about birds? Finally, what about fowl? All kosher birds you can eat. All kosher birds. And Rashi says it's coming to include another thing. We know by the Mitzvah, an interesting story, an interesting case, when the leper person would bring 2 birds to the temple to get purified at his day when his leprosy went away. One bird he would slaughter, and the other bird he would send away. That bird that he would send away was brought as a sacrifice. Once he let it go, it's a public bird. Somebody caught it. They don't have to be worried, oh no, I'm going to catch a bird that was used as a sacrifice. They're able to eat that bird if that bird was caught, the verses are saying. So any kosher bird you could eat, even that one. And this one, you're not allowed to eat. And this is including the other bird, the second bird, the bird that was slaughtered by the leper person. That's already slaughtered as a sacrifice. You cannot use that one to eat it. And he's going to list you the whole list of non-kosher birds. Now, as Rashi says, why is he choosing to list the not by animals? He chose to list the kosher animal because it's a much smaller list. Well, by birds, it's the opposite. The list of non-kosher birds, although being a big list, are still much less than the kosher birds. So what he does is he lists for you exactly what are the non-kosher birds, and he's going to list them for you here. Hanesher, va'peres, va'ozniya, the eagle, or the vulture, or the osprey. Verse 13, they're all not kosher. He uses the same word, or the white vulture, the black vulture, and the kite. And Rashi says that actually it's really the same kind of species bird. So why is it repeating it in 3 ways? The 3 names are indicating different personalities of the bird. One thing, Ra'ah, that it could see very far. This kind, like certain birds have an ability to see really far, but why are you using 3 different names? So you shouldn't make a mistake and say, oh, I'm eating this bird, not that bird. So the Torah making sure that you don't eat the non-kosher bird when it lists its list, calls the 3 different names that it has. That's called Oyrev Limina, and all kinds of ravens, non-kosher. They're not good. That's Basayana, Basatachmos, Basashacha, Basanetz Limineu. the ostrich, the owl, the gull, and the hawk, with all their species, are prohibited. They're not kosher. It's a kois, it's a yanchuk, it's the chamas, the falcon, the ibis, and the bat. All these things are not kosher. V'akos, v'sarachama, v'sashalach, pelican, the magpie, the cormorant, all the kind of fit. One of the birds of the shalach, he says it's that catches fish in the ocean, the sea, and eats it from the sea. V'achasida, v'anaf, v'lamina, the stork, the heron and its species, v'atuchus, v'atalaf, and the hoopie, and the atalef. I don't know if I'm reading all these things correctly. And every flying insect, the small ones, like the flies, the hornets, the unclean species of locusts, all of them that go into the category of sherets, of these unclean insects. They're all impure to you. A Jew is not allowed to eat them. Holy nation, we can't eat this stuff. But all kosher birds you should eat. And the Rashi is saying here that there's a prohibition and a positive mitzvah on it. And we're learning both the animals and this, the positive element and the prohibition, that when you violate it, not just are you violating a positive mitzvah, you're also violating a prohibition at the same time. You shouldn't eat any kind of carcass, which means it wasn't slaughtered correctly, right? What happens if the animal that wasn't slaughtered correctly and it's not kosher? What should you do with it? To the converts, there's like a half a kind of conversion ability, which is not a full Jewish convert. In the olden days, if a non-Jew wanted to live in Eretz Yisrael, he had to take on himself not to serve idols, but he would be allowed to eat non-slaughtered animals that were not ritually slaughtered correctly. So no problem. You can have a market of that in Israel, even though no one else, none of the Jews could eat it. But you have a market of selling that to non-Jews, to the local converts, the partial converts who are not full Jewish, who are allowed to eat the carcass in that fashion. That's okay. Shabbat today, you should give it to them and they get to eat. And they could eat it, or you could sell it to non-Jews, which is what many Jewish slaughter homes do today. Because you're a holy nation, Hashem, Jews are holy, they have to live this special diet. And he's going to finish with, don't cook a calf in its mother's milk. Now, we've learned before a few things the verse is telling us here. Number one, he's telling you you're a holy nation. Rashi is saying, even the foods that you're allowed, you could take on a higher stringency of not eating. For example, pas Yisrael, like some cases you might say, pas a bread that's baked by a baker that wasn't baked by a Jew. People take on themselves restrictions in certain cases of kosher that maybe even if it's allowed, you should still sanctify yourself in certain cases, depending exactly on the case, to be even more stringent in certain elements where the stringency is required. And Rashi says that when you come to such people who take on these logical decisions, again, halachic decisions of where some level, even if it's not a clear out case of pig or something which is not allowed, you're still not allowing it. Only one, let's say, bread baked by a Jew. You should follow those customs and not eat in front of those people. You should make sure to, at least in their presence, to live up to their level of stringency in eating, not eating what they shouldn't be eating. And he finishes with, don't cook a kid in its mother's milk. Now, earlier Rashi taught us that it says 3 times in the Torah, don't cook a kid, meaning meat of a goat, in its mother's milk, to teach us we learned earlier, you can't eat it, you can't cook it, and you can't have benefit from it, even if you're not eating it. Here, Rashi is saying a different 3 things we learned from the fact that the Torah tells it to us 3 times. That one detail it is, wild animals are not included in the original biblical prohibition. I'm not sure what that means, but at least that's one thing Rashi is saying. Birds, and that's famous, that chicken is not the original biblical prohibition of meat and milk, but it is 100% prohibited today rabbinically, but at least not biblically. And also, very interesting, a non-kosher animal is not have a prohibition of meat and milk. So let's say pig and cheese, if someone had a cheeseburger, but the burger was made out of pig, by eating it, you would be violating, middle of the classroom. By eating the pig, you would be violating the prohibition of eating pig. But guess what? You actually would not be violating the prohibition of milk and meat, because the prohibition of milk and meat is only on kosher meat and kosher milk. And that is the end of today's fascinating